What would you do if, right now, you saw those red and blue lights flashing in your rearview mirror? Your heart rate spikes. Your palms get a little sweaty. Your mind starts racing through a dozen different scenarios, most of them bad. You haven't done anything wrong, you're pretty sure. But there's that tiny voice in the back of your head asking, what if? What if I was speeding just a little? What if that stop sign wasn't as clear as I thought? What if the officer's having a bad day? Here's a question for you, and I really want you to think about your answer before you type it in the comments. When a police officer walks up to your window and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over today?" What is the very first thing that comes out of your mouth? Seriously, pause for a second. What would you actually say? Most people, and I mean the vast majority, say some version of the same thing. "I'm sorry, officer, I was probably going a little fast." Or, "I didn't see that sign." Or, "I was in a hurry because I'm late for work." They think it's polite. They think it's respectful. They think if they just admit a little bit of fault, be a little humble, the officer will appreciate their honesty and maybe, just maybe, let them off with a warning. That is not what's actually happening. And if you say the wrong thing in those first few seconds, you are not making the situation better. You are making everything worse. You are handing the officer evidence. You are giving away your rights. And you are doing it with a smile on your face, thinking you're being the good guy. Stay with me, because this next part matters more than you think. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent hundreds of hours studying traffic stop case law, body camera footage, legal defense strategies, and interviews with former prosecutors and defense attorneys. I've broken down real cases where a single sentence turned a routine stop into an arrest, a conviction, or a financial disaster. And I've also seen the rare cases where someone said nothing at all and walked away completely free. The difference between those two outcomes often comes down to less than 10 words. Here's the promise of this video. By the time you finish watching, you will know exactly what not to say during a traffic stop. You will understand the psychological game that most people don't even realize they're playing. You will learn the one phrase that lawyers say you should never, under any circumstances, utter to an officer. And you will walk away with a simple, legally sound script that protects you without making you look guilty or combative. This isn't about being rude to police. This isn't about sovereign citizen nonsense. This is about understanding how the legal system actually works and how your own words can be twisted against you before you even realize what's happening. So let's go back to that moment. The lights, the stop, the officer approaching your window. The first mistake happens before anyone says a word. It's psychological. When an authority figure confronts you, your brain defaults to a social script. Be polite, de-escalate, apologize if necessary, cooperate. That works at a dinner party. That works at work when your boss is annoyed. That does not work in a legal encounter where everything you say can be written down, recorded, and used as evidence in court. Here's what most people miss. A traffic stop is not a conversation. It is an information gathering procedure. The officer's job from the moment they turn on those lights is to build a case. Not necessarily against you. Not because they're evil, but because that is literally their job. They are trained to observe, to question, and to document. And the single most valuable piece of evidence in any traffic stop is your own admission. Think about that. If you say, "I'm sorry, I was going a little fast," you have just confessed to speeding. The officer didn't need to prove it. They didn't need radar. They didn't need to pace you. You gave them the confession for free. And that confession is gold in court. A lawyer can fight a radar gun. A lawyer can challenge calibration records. A lawyer can argue about line of sight and weather conditions. But a lawyer cannot unsay your own words. "Your Honor, my client said I was going a little fast." Case closed. But it gets worse. Much worse. There's a specific question that officers are trained to ask. It sounds innocent. It sounds almost friendly. "Do you know why I pulled you over today?" On the surface, it seems like they're giving you a chance to explain yourself, to be honest, to show good faith. But here's the psychological trap. That question is not designed to help you. It is designed to get you to admit to something, anything, that justifies the stop. Here's the bad way to answer. "Oh, I think I was going over the limit back there," or "I might have rolled through that stop sign," or "My registration is expired, isn't it?" Every single one of those answers is a voluntary admission of guilt. And once you say it, the officer has probable cause for whatever happens next. A ticket? Absolutely. A search? Possibly. An arrest? If they find something else, yes. Here's the good way to answer. And this is the part where most people get uncomfortable. Because the good answer feels wrong. It feels rude. It feels like you're hiding something. But it is legally the smartest thing you can do. "Officer, I'm not sure why you stopped me." That's it. That's the entire sentence. "I'm not sure why you stopped me." Notice what you didn't do. You didn't lie, you didn't confess, you didn't guess. You simply stated a fact. You are not sure. And here's the beautiful thing about that answer. It puts the burden back where it belongs, on the officer. They are the one who initiated the stop. They are the one who needs to have reasonable suspicion. They are the one who needs to articulate a specific violation. You do not have to do their job for them. But wait, isn't that being difficult? Isn't that going to make the officer angry? Won't they just write you a ticket for being uncooperative? I understand that fear, it's real, and it's exactly what the system relies on. The fear of seeming rude, the fear of confrontation, the fear that if you don't play along, things will get worse. But here's the truth that very few people know. Politeness is not a legal defense. Being nice does not void a ticket. And cooperating beyond what is legally required almost never benefits you. Let me give you a real-world example. There's a body camera video that law students study. It's a routine stop for a broken taillight. The driver, a middle-aged woman, is clearly nervous. The officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" She says, "I think my registration might be late. I've been meaning to renew it." That was her first mistake. Her registration was actually fine, but she admitted to something she hadn't even done. The officer then asks if he can search the car. She says yes because she thinks saying no will make her look guilty. Inside the car, under the passenger seat, is a small bag of marijuana that belongs to her adult son who borrowed the car last week. She didn't know it was there. Didn't matter. She consented to the search. She admitted to a registration issue that didn't exist, and she ended up with a possession charge that took 2 years and $10,000 to resolve. Now watch what happens in the alternate version. Same stop, same broken taillight, same hidden bag of marijuana. But this time the driver says, "Officer, I'm not sure why you stopped me." The officer says, "Your taillight is out." The driver says, "Oh, I didn't realize. Thank you for letting me know." The officer asks, "Do you mind if I take a quick look inside the car?" And here's the magic word. "Yes, I do mind. I do not consent to any searches." The officer cannot search without probable cause. A broken taillight is not probable cause for a drug search. The officer might be annoyed, they might write a ticket for the taillight, but they cannot search, and that bag of marijuana never sees the light of day. The driver fixes her taillight, pays a small fine if she gets one, and goes home. That is the power of knowing what to say and what not to say. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. Because there's one specific phrase that lawyers say is the single worst thing you can utter during a traffic stop. And it's not what you think. It's not a curse word. It's not, "I know my rights." It's something that sounds completely innocent. Something that most people say automatically without thinking. The phrase is, "I don't have anything illegal in the car." Why is that so dangerous? Because on the surface, it seems helpful. You're reassuring the officer, you're being cooperative, you're trying to move things along. But here's what you don't realize. That statement is voluntary, it is unsolicited, and it signals to the officer that you are thinking about illegal items. Why would you mention illegal items if there aren't any? A truly innocent person, in the mind of a trained officer, doesn't feel the need to declare their innocence. They just answer questions directly and briefly. When you volunteer, "I don't have anything illegal," you are psychologically implying that the possibility of illegal items was on your mind, and that raises suspicion. There's a famous study on this from criminal justice research. Officers were shown body camera footage of traffic stops and asked to rate the driver's suspiciousness on a scale. The drivers who volunteered statements like, "I'm not hiding anything," or "You can check, I've got nothing illegal," were rated as significantly more suspicious than drivers who simply answered questions without volunteering extra information. Why? Because deceptive people, according to the study, tend to over-explain. They try too hard to seem innocent, and officers are trained to recognize that pattern. So here's the rule. Never volunteer, never explain, never apologize, never confess, never consent. Answer direct questions briefly and truthfully, but do not offer a single word more than what is asked. Let me give you a concrete script, because I know you want to know exactly what to say. The officer asks for your license and registration. You say, "Yes, officer, here it is." That's it. The officer asks where you're coming from. You say, "I'm coming from work," or "I'm coming from home." You do not say, "I'm coming from a bar," or "I'm coming from my friend's house where we were watching the game and I had 2 beers. The officer asks if you've been drinking. You say, "No, I have not been drinking." If that's true, if it's not true, you say nothing. You have the right to remain silent. Use it. But here's the part nobody talks about. The most dangerous moment of a traffic stop is not the beginning, it's the middle. That's when the officer starts asking questions that feel conversational. "So where are you headed tonight? What do you do for work? Beautiful car, is it yours?" These are not friendly questions. These are fishing expeditions. Every answer you give provides information that can be used to justify extending the stop, calling a K-9 unit, or asking for consent to search. Let me show you how it works. You say, "I'm headed to visit my brother." The officer says, "Oh yeah? What's his name?" You say, "Mike." The officer says, "Does Mike live around here?" You say, "Yeah, about 20 minutes away." Now the officer has established that you are not in a hurry, you know the area, and you have a destination. That might seem harmless, but if the officer decides to ask for a search and you say no, they can call a drug dog. And here's the legal trap. The dog can arrive in 20 minutes. And because you said your destination is 20 minutes away, the officer can argue that the stop is still reasonably related to the original traffic violation. The clock hasn't run out. The dog arrives, the dog alerts, which is almost always fake, but the courts treat it as probable cause. And now your car is being searched. All because you answered a friendly question about your brother Mike. Do you see how this works? Every word you say is a piece of the puzzle. The officer is not your friend. They are not being nosy because they care about your weekend plans. They are gathering information to build a case, to extend the stop, or to find a reason to search. And the only way to stop that is to stop talking. But you're probably thinking, okay, but I can't just sit there in complete silence. That's going to make things worse. And you're right. Complete silence is not the answer either. Refusing to answer basic identifying questions can get you arrested in some states for obstruction. There's a balance. And that balance is what separates people who walk away clean from people who end up in handcuffs. Here's the balance. You must provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance. That is required by law. You must identify yourself if asked. That is also required. You must answer direct questions about your identity and your operation of the vehicle. That's it. Everything else is optional. Everything else is a choice. And the smart choice is to politely decline. How do you decline without sounding guilty? You use a simple, repeatable script. Officer, I respect you and I want to cooperate, but I don't answer questions beyond my identification. Or even simpler, Officer, I'd prefer to remain silent. That is your constitutional right. It is not rude to exercise your rights. It is not suspicious to remain silent. The Supreme Court has made that very clear. You cannot be penalized for invoking your right to remain silent. And here's the psychological shift that happens when you do this. The officer realizes immediately that you are not an easy target. You are not going to confess. You are not going to consent. You are not going to chat. You are a hard target. And most officers, in most situations, will not waste time on a hard target. They will write the ticket for whatever they stopped you for, or give you a warning and send you on your way. Because their goal is not to arrest innocent people. Their goal is to clear stops efficiently and move on to the next call. The easy confessions are the ones that lead to deeper investigations. The hard targets are the ones that get a ticket and a have a nice day. I want you to really understand this. The single most important decision you make during a traffic stop happens before the officer even reaches your window. It is the decision to stop talking, to stop explaining, to stop apologizing, to stop being helpful, to stop treating the officer like a customer service representative who needs to be appeased. The officer is a legal adversary in that moment, not an enemy, not a villain, but an adversary. And you do not help your adversary build a case against you. Let me leave you with one final story. This one is real. It happened in Texas. A young man was pulled over for speeding, 70 in a 55, clear violation. He could have just taken the ticket. Instead, when the officer asked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he said, "I'm sorry, officer. I know I was speeding. I'm late for work and I just wasn't paying attention." The officer said, "I appreciate your honesty. Have you been drinking tonight?" The young man said, "No, sir, I don't drink." The officer said, "You mind if I take a quick look in your back seat?" The young man said, "Go ahead, I've got nothing to hide." In the back seat, under a jacket, was a vape pen that contained THC oil. He had forgotten it was there. He had bought it 3 months ago at a dispensary in a state where it was legal. But Texas is not that state. He was arrested for possession of a controlled substance. He spent a night in jail. He lost his job because he didn't show up. He paid $12,000 to a lawyer. He ended up with a deferred adjudication that still shows up on background checks. All because he said, "I've got nothing to hide." Now imagine the same stop, same speeding, same vape pen in the back seat. But this time the driver says nothing, except, "Here is my license and registration." The officer says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The driver says, "I'm not sure, officer." The officer says, "You were going 70 in a 55. The driver says nothing. The officer says, "I'm going to write you a ticket for speeding." The driver says, "Okay." The officer says, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" The driver says, "Officer, I respect you, but I don't answer questions." The officer writes the ticket. The driver drives away. The vape pen never exists as far as the law is concerned. The driver pays the speeding fine. Life continues. That is the difference. That is what's at stake. Not just a ticket. Not just a fine. Your freedom, your record, your job, your future. So here's my final question for you, and I really want you to answer in the comments. Have you ever said something during a traffic stop that you regretted later? Have you ever apologized for something you didn't do, or admitted to something you weren't sure of, or consented to a search you should have refused? If you have, you are not alone. Almost everyone has. But now you know better. And knowing better means you can do better. The next time you see those lights in your rearview mirror, take a breath, turn off the engine, put your hands on the wheel, wait for the officer to approach, and remember you are not being rude by protecting your rights. You are not being suspicious by remaining silent. You are being smart. You are being safe. You are being free. Most people will forget this video in a week, but you won't. Because the next time that moment comes, and it will come, you'll hear my voice in the back of your head, and you'll know exactly what not to say. And that knowledge, that's the difference between a bad day and a disaster.